Hello and welcome to the 14th chapter of the course. In this chapter, we will be looking at how different field sizes change the bounty strategies and the risk premiums. In order to accomplish that, we will run some different scenarios for different stages of the tournament, the beginning, the bubble, and then the final table for different field sizes, and we will draw some general conclusions. So to start things off, let's have a look at if there is a difference in the bounty value at the beginning of the tournament based on tournament field size. In short, the answer is no. To show that, we will take our known tournament spot at this point. We have our $530 buy-in. Starting stack is 25K, big blind is currently 500. Starting bounty is 250, so 125 on each player's head, and everyone has a starting bounty. So what we want to do here is run this spot with a winner-take-all kind of structure for, let's say, 100 players and then 1,000 players, so that we can see if the risk premiums are different between the two. What we expect to see is that the risk premiums will be very, very similar, with them being a little bit higher on the 100-player field, because 100 players with a winner-take-all situation, well, these players have a bit of a higher chance to actually win the top prize, as opposed to them being 1,000 players. So let's start by doing start of tournament, 100 people field, and have a look at the risk premiums. So we can see that the stacks that cover the others have around minus 9.4% against the medium stacks, and then against the shorter stacks, it is at minus 11.3 to 11.4. So for example, against EP, who has 27 big blinds, the big blind is at minus 9.4, and against the bottom who only has 21 big blinds, the big blind is at minus 11.4. Now, if we run this with 1,000 players, and we compare the same risk premiums, we can see that indeed the numbers are very close. For example, the big blind now against EP has minus 9.5, down from 9.4, and against the bottom is at minus 11.5, down from 11.4. So the risk premiums here are going to be very, very similar. Just let me pull them side to side for you as well. So left side is 100 players. This is 1,000 players. Yeah, you can see the risk premiums are super, super similar. And it goes based on our expectations that the risk premiums are actually a little bit higher with the 100% field and lower on the 1,000 players field. So that checks out. Then let's examine some bubble ICM spots. For this, I have two field sizes. One is fairly small and the other one is on the larger side. So the small field is, let me size this down a little bit. Here you go. It is this example of ours from the bubble ICM chapter, where we're on the direct bubble. As we can see, 14 players left with 13 players paid, and the average stack is 12.4. So yeah, it is very close to the actual final table here. Starting stack is 10,000 chips, as we can see. So a starting bounty here is worth around 3.5k chips, or like 0.7 big blinds. So let's have a look at the risk premiums here, where we can see the bubble factors. So the covered stacks have about 14.7 or like 14.3 to 15% risk premium. The exception being the cutoff who only has 3 big blinds with super short. So yeah, sure. But the hijack, for example, with 6.7 big blinds has around 14 to 15 risk premium. Now, if we compare this to a larger field bubble, where we have this spot. Now, this is a 2K buy-in with a 30K starting stack. The big blind currently is 6K, and we're on the direct bubble, 65 players left with 64 players paid. Let me bring it up a bit. Yeah, here you can see 64 players paid. So at this point, the starting bounty, one starting bounty would be worth around 11K chips. Let's do 0.35 by 30,000. Yeah, so 10.5K chips is what a starting bounty would be worth, and the starting bounty is gonna be 500. So a few interesting things to note here. So a starting bounty is worth 10.5K, which is like 1.8 big blinds. So it appears as if a starting bounty is worth more in the larger field than the smaller field. However, that is incorrect because we need to compare it to the average stack size to figure out the importance of the bounty. Here, the average stack size is 41 big blinds, and it is like 246,000 chips. So if we divide 10,500, which is how much the starting bounty is worth, by the average stacks, which is 246,393, then we can see that it is about 4.2% of the average stack. And if we do the same thing in the previous example that we have, which is this one, so here the average stack is 61.8K. So what we need to do is divide by 61,800. And we can see that here it is 5.6% of the average stack. So indeed, we can see that the bounty is more important in the smaller field tournament. Now, back to this spot, we should also check the risk premiums here. If you remember, on the smaller field tournament, the risk premiums were around 15%, as we said, for the cover stacks. And we are looking at big field bubble ICM. So the risk premiums here look like this. Now, we can notice quickly that the cover stacks have significantly higher risk premium. They have around 18%, at least the very short stacks with 8 big blinds and 9 big blinds. Now, why does this happen? Well, the reason is that in the lower field tournament, we are actually very close to getting significant pay jumps and reasonably close to the top prize, which is, as we know, PSKO super top heavy, so we really need to win them. So even these 6, 9, whatever big blind stacks in the small field tournaments, yes, they're very short. Yes, they really want to make the money. But by doubling up, they also have a decent shot to win the tournament and making some pay jumps. Whereas in the large field tournament, where the bubble happens on 64 players left, making the money for the short stacks is the number one priority. Because if the 7 big blind stack or 8 big blind stack goes to 16 after doubling, well, nothing really changes. They don't really cover many people on the table, and they don't have a significant chance of a deep run either, or making any pay jumps. And this is a reoccurring theme. We see this very, very often, that in small field bubbles, basically risk premium is going to be lower, and doubling up has more EV, so we get to play a little bit more risky. Now, what about final table ICM? So for that, I ran 3 different scenarios. One being with a fairly small field, one being with an average field, and one being with a really large field. So the first thing we want to do is look at the very large field final table. And that is going to be from the Sunday Million. So for those of you that are not aware, the Sunday Million is a $109 buy-in tournament with 1 million guaranteed, so just gathers many, many thousands players. The starting stack is going to be 50K with a starting bounty of 25, and currently the big blind is 2 million. So how much is one starting bounty worth here? Well, since we are 9 players left out of multiple thousand, then we can use the 48% of a starting stack, which, as I said, is 50,000. So a starting bounty here would be worth 24,000 chips, with the big blind being 2 million. Of course, we're not really going to have many players with a starting bounty here. Let's examine what the shortest bounty looks like, which is the button. So the button has 278 by 25, 11.1 starting bounties. Multiplying that by 24,000 chips leads us to 266,000 roughly of a chip approximation for his bounty value, which is less than a quarter, not a quarter, because the big blind, as we said, is 2 million. So it's about 10% of a big blind. It's basically worth like 1 ante or a little bit more, but you get the point. So we can see that the short bounties are worth basically nothing. What about the top bounty now? What about this bounty, which is 4,079? Well, I guess 4,080. How much is that worth? Well, let's follow the same process. So 4,080 divided by 25, it's 163 starting bounties. Multiplying that by 24,000, we get to a value of about 3.9 million, or roughly 2 big blinds. So we can see that even the top bounty just isn't really worth much. It's only worth 2 big blinds. So what this means is that we don't really care about bounties in these type of tournaments, in these huge field tournaments, and we instead want to go more for the actual pay jumps. And this is reflected in the solver as well, where if we look at the risk premiums for the source stacks, they are actually very, very high. These risk premiums are on par with how they would be in a non-PSKO tournament. We can see the middling stacks have over 20%, and some of the lower stacks, like the, for example, 35 big blind stack, having around 18.5. Of course, the very source stacks don't have a very high risk premium. It's around 9%, but still, it's just very high risk premiums all across the board because the PSKO, like the bounty aspect, just doesn't really matter much. And as I said, this is true for almost all of the big field tournaments. Late in the tournament, the bounties become pretty much irrelevant, and we play a strategy very close to how it would be in a normal non-PSKO tournament. So to compare, let's have a look at how a medium field tournament would actually look like, a medium field final table. So for that, we are going to go here. So this is a tournament with 600 runners. Maybe the picture isn't very clear, but yeah, it's 600 runners. And it's a 1,000 buy-in with a 50K starting stack. Right now, the big line is 80,000. So we have 9 players left out of 600, which means that we have like 1.5% of the field remaining. So we can use maybe around 43% of a starting stack, a starting bounty being worth a starting stack. So starting bounty is 250. It's a 1,000 buy-in, so 500 would be the starting bounty in full, and the amount we would be getting would be 250. So a starting bounty of 250 would be worth, as we said, around like 43% of 50K, so 21.5K, which is about a quarter of a big blind. So let's see how much my bounty is worth. I have 2,203. So I have 2,203 divided by 250 means 8.8 starting bounties. And if we multiply that by 21,500, we get that my bounty is worth around 190,000, which is about 2.5 big blinds, 2.4 big blinds, because again, the big line is 80,000. So not too much, but already more than before. I have one of the shortest, smallest bounties, and we can see that it's worth more than what the top bounty was worth in the Sunday Million final table. Let's also check what the top bounty is worth here. So the top bounty would be 5,679. So we have 5,679 divided by 250, 22.7 starting bounties, and then we multiply that by 21,500, and we get that it's worth 488,000 roughly, which if we divide by the big blind, it's worth around 6 big blinds, like 6.1 big blinds. So again, not too significant, but more significant than before. And if we have a look at the risk premiums here as well, we have this one. We can see that they are significantly lower all across the board. Let me open again the large field risk premiums for comparison. So left side is big field and right side are the medium field. And yeah, we can see that basically the highest risk premium for the midfield is 16.4, whereas in the Sunday Million, the big field was 21.2. So yeah, we can see very clearly that risk premiums are quite a bit lower in the midfield final table. Now, what if we had a lower field one? So for that, we have this final table here. So this is from a tournament featured later on in the hand history review with Graphical. But basically, this is a 10,000 buy-in PSKO with a 250,000 starting stack, and 2.5K is the starting bounty. It has 69 runners. So at this point, we have 9 players left out of 69, which means that we're at about 13% of the field remaining, where a starting bounty would be worth about 35% of the starting stack. So a starting bounty would be worth 0.35, would be worth about 27,500 or around 3 big blinds. So again, we can see that the lowest bounty is worth even more now. At the same time, the top bounty, which is 19,100, so 9,100 divided by 2.5k, 7.64, and then we multiply that by 87,500. We get that it's worth around 670,000, which is about 22 big blinds. So what we see here is that actually in these low field tournaments, bounties are very, very significant. Again, this is very, very common where the largest the field, the less important the bounties become. And this is, again, reflected in the risk premiums, where if we open the simulation for this one, where we have small field final table ICM, and I open the risk premium, this is on the right side. So left side, we have big field final table, then mid field final table, and small field final table. You can see that in the small field final table, the risk premiums are significantly lower. Of course, like the stack size distribution has something to do with it, like the amount of big stacks and short stacks and mid stacks, obviously. But it doesn't justify this big of a difference. So we can see that in the small field final table, the largest risk premium is what, like 11%? So not that much, as opposed to 21 in the very large field final table. The main reason this happens is that in the smaller field tournaments, usually a bigger portion of the bounty prize pool gets to reach the final table. So they're just worth more. They are more important compared to the pay jumps. So to summarize, what we have here is that at the beginning of the tournament, field size doesn't really matter. On the bubble, field size starts mattering a little bit, and on larger field sizes, it's more important for us to actually make the money. Whereas on smaller field sizes, of course, making the money is still very important, but because we're closer to the final table and the pay jumps, doubling up has more future EV for us. So we are closer to actually getting serious money. Also, the bounties are worth a little bit more on the lower field tournaments. By worth, I don't mean in terms of what portion of a starting stack a starting bounty is worth, but that they are more significant. They represent a bigger portion of someone's stack size. And on final tables, this is even more extreme. With the larger the field size, the more important the pay jumps become, and the bounties are almost negligible. And the smaller the field size, the more important bounties are, and the lower the risk premium, the lower the ICM pressure. Again, these examples are hard to nail down exactly in terms of actually comparing the same thing, because as always, like the bounty distribution will be a bit different, or the stack size will be a bit different. But it still, I think, paints an accurate enough picture of how field size affects the bounty value and the risk premium.